We're also learning more about how ISIS pays for its war machine. The terror group buys bombs and pays fighters with the billions of dollars it makes from the oil fields, its mines and banks under its control. It raked in $2 billion in 2014 alone. Now, for more on how ISIS gets its money, let's speak to CNN Money's Jose Pagliery in New York. Jose, ISIS is undoubtedly the richest terrorist network ever. You reviewed dozens of reports, interviewed military scholars and financial investigators. Just explain what you found.
So what we found is that ISIS is very much different from al-Qaeda. This notion of a terrorist network that relies on rich donors to send them money with missions to spread the Islamist message, that's not what ISIS is. ISIS is really an Islamic state. They're a powerhouse. They have land now. They have assets. That means several things. On the front of oil, they control oil assets, which means that they can pull it out of the ground, refine it, and sell it on the black market. That brings them in anywhere between $500 million plus, right? And then they actually own the land. They have 8 million people who live on this land, like this teacher you had on the program just now. And they tax these people. There's an income tax for them. They pay a business tax when they go to stores. They pay a 2% sales tax as well. There's a special tax on Christians called jizya. There are many ways that this mafia-like organization acts like a government and then imposes these rules on the people and squeezes money out of them. And this is what people tend to forget. There are still businesses that are actively working in the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. And so people tend to fields, they tend to crops, they sell them. That gets taxed. In Iraq, for instance, a third of their wheat and barley is now in ISIS-controlled territory. What that means is that the people there are paying taxes to ISIS, millions of dollars a year. In 2014, apparently that was about $360 million. New estimates say that they could be as much as $800 million this year. That's a huge flow of money, and that's where they're finding the money to pay for bombs, equipment, paying for fighters, and paying for that expansion, because let's remember what their goal is here. It's spreading that message across the world. This is a long war for them.
Yeah, incredible amounts of money. Now, we know that the US-led coalition is destroying some of the oil fields, oil tankers. Is that enough to hurt their money stream?
That's an interesting question, because the damage that the US-led coalition is doing is significant. I mean, what they've done is that they've targeted oil tankers, oil refineries, and they've really crippled ISIS's ability to make a lot of money off of the oil. ISIS can still pull the oil out of the ground. It's harder for them to refine it, which means that they're making oil that's less quality, and so they have a harder time selling that on the black market. Oil prices, too, have dropped, and so it's even harder for them to make money that way. But again, this only cuts off one avenue of funding. ISIS still has land, and so they're able to really squeeze and extort cash out of all the people there. And on top of that, they're looting banks in Mosul, Iraq. They stole $500 million to $1 billion out of that bank alone, the central bank there. They have kidnap for ransom schemes as well. They're selling antiquities on the black market that they steal from temples that they're raiding. And so they've got lots of avenues of revenue here. The trick is going to be taking that land away from them so that they cannot squeeze the money out of that asset.
Okay, Jose Pagliery, some great research there. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, as Western countries try to find a way to combat ISIS and its ideology, there are questions as to why Arab neighbours are not doing more. CNN's Becky Anderson takes a look at that.
The gruesome killing of Jordanian pilot Lieutenant Colonel Murat Kazasbey, seen by many as a turning point in the Arab world's fight against the barbarity of ISIS. Regional countries, led by Jordan, talked about owning the war against the group.
This is our war, and we need to stand and fight terrorism because it's done in our region.
Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain and the UAE carried out strikes in Syria, and Egypt went after ISIS in Libya after militants there beheaded 21 Egyptian Christians. But nearly 1 year on, it's not clear how active Arab states are in the fight against ISIS, either in the air or in support. According to a New York Times article from last month, the Saudi Air Force hasn't flown a mission against ISIS targets in Syria or Iraq since September. The UAE stopped in March and Jordan in August. CNN has reached out to all of these countries to get their side of it, but we haven't yet gotten a response. Now, many observers say the apparent absence of key Arab nations is baffling. ISIS's so-called caliphate is much closer to countries in this region than the West, and extremists have done much harm to the image of Islam and Muslims. But to understand the reasons, you've got to look at the conflicting interests of regional countries, specifically a bloody competition for power and influence between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Take Yemen. Analysts say the war there is currently the most pressing concern for Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia. Their aim is to defeat Iranian-backed Houthi rebels who ousted the government and took the capital Sana'a last year. Saudi Arabia and its Gulf Arab allies are also less inclined to carry out strikes against ISIS targets if doing so helps the Iran-backed governments in Baghdad or Damascus, according to regional experts.
Maybe there is a need for these two countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, to agree on the end game, and I don't think that is coming anytime soon, by the way. So what are we in? We're left with nothing. We're left with no direction on the regional level, no direction on the international level, and then you come and you ask the Arabs to join in. Do what?
So, if regional powers like Iran and Saudi Arabia are distracted by an all-consuming rivalry, many in the West who wish to see ISIS eliminated may continue to ask, where are the Arabs?
This is the world right now. Still ahead, the opposition calls it an historic victory after coming out on top in Venezuela's legislative election. We'll have the details in a live report just ahead. Stay with us.